Everyone. Good afternoon. I'm so glad that you could join us today for Textile Talks. I'm Amy Milne. I'm the Executive Director of the Quilt Alliance. I'm connecting today from Morganton, North Carolina, which is in the Blue Ridge Mountains, the foothills. And this is Emma Parker, my colleague,
Hello.
who's Hey Emma, who's joining us from Durham, North Carolina. So Team North Carolina, I see a bunch of North Carolinians in the chat as well. And our colleague Lucy Shaken is helping us today. You can see she's just put a message in the chat, and we'll be sharing a lot of resources in the chat today. And I hope you will share where you're connecting from in the chat and ask any questions you might have in the Q&A. And if you have any tech questions, it's okay to put them in the chat too. And we'll try to get to you. But what a great, wow, I see, as usual, I am seeing connections from all over the world, and I love it. We love it. And we thank you so much for being here. We'd love to hear what kind of fiber work you make or collect or love. If it's quilts, tell us. If it's some other fiber media, we'd love to know. That's so fun to see in the chat box too. Today's program we are going to challenge you to document that quilt. It's like a game show. I feel like we should say it in unison, Emma. And yes, even that one, the one under your cat, this is the famous Fraser Dwayne Quilt Alliance technical advisor and assistant. And we have a lot of photos of him, so we used it. But today we really want to get in there with with three separate categories of quilts. Emma's going to talk a little bit more about that. And I'm going to come back at the end of the program to share a mystery quilt, which is the cutie behind me. But first, I want to tell you a little bit about Textile Talks. If you have not, if this is your first time joining us, welcome. Thank you for finding us. And if this is your 210th, I think it is, Textile Talks, thank you so much for staying with us and coming each week. We love seeing our return attendees. But Textile Talks is weekly. It happens on Wednesdays, almost every Wednesdays. There's some on the holidays towards the end of the year that we skip, but almost every Wednesday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. And it's a partnership with the Quilt Alliance that Emma and I represent, and our three partner organizations that you see here: International Quilt Museum, Studio Art Quilt Associates, and Surface Design Association. All Textile Talks are recorded and they're available via our YouTube channel. Or our YouTube playlist. Emma's going to put in the link right there for the YouTube recording playlist. So if you want to bookmark that for the future, this recording will be shared in a couple days, usually the day after, sometimes the day of. So check back. If you have to leave early, you can watch the recording, and that is just fantastic. And all of this great content is brought to you by our sponsors that we featured in the beginning. Slideshow will do so at the end if you didn't get a chance. And we also appreciate all the individual donors who have supported Textile Talks. And you can, Lucy or Emma can put that link in the chat too if you'd like to make a donation to the series. So a little bit more about the Quilt Alliance. Our mission is to document, preserve, and share the stories of all quilts and all quilt makers. It doesn't matter what style of quilting or whether you make art quilts or you long arm quilts, whether you make them for utility or whether they are intended to be artworks. Our mission is to document, preserve, and share the stories of your quilts. And if you'd like to find out more about the Quilt Alliance and our oral history and quilt documentation projects, you can visit our website, quiltalliance.org, and consider becoming a member or a donor. And because we really rely on this kind of community support to carry out our mission, we receive lots of great grants for projects, but our members and our donors really make it possible to fuel our operations. We couldn't do it without our members. So one thing that I want to share with you, Emma, if you'll go to that next one, is an event coming up in September called Quilters Take a Moment. And maybe you've attended a Quilters Take a Moment, or maybe Quilters Take Manhattan when it was called that, when we actually held it in person. Those were the days when we gathered in Manhattan. But now we gather virtually, and it's called Quilters Take a Moment, and it's meant to be an education series with all kinds of topics about documenting your quilts. And this year, for the very first time, we have decided to make Quilters Take a Moment complimentary to our members. So if you are a member and your membership is good through September 20th and 21st, you can register to attend for free. And our memberships start at a very affordable rate of $30 a year. So this is the perfect time to start your membership. Emma, if you'll go to the next one, we can show what the topics are. This year's topics, again, all about quilt documentation. In fact, the session that we're doing today was intended for Quilters Take a Moment as one of these sessions, but we decided to do it for a textile talk to give you an idea of what it's like. So these are all the sessions that we'll have, telling the story of your quilt through photography with Kitty Wilkin, video as a tool for documenting your quilts with Lyric Montgomery Kennard, an archive of your own using spreadsheets to describe and catalog your quilts, presented by Rachel Ivy Clark, documentation as creative practice with Hannah Parks, documenting your guild or group with Adonna Richardson, who is a Quilt Alliance board member, and sustainable routines for quilt documentation by Coach Jenny Grover. It's going to be a fabulous event. And so I would love to see some new members today, and so that you can take advantage of this. It will also be recorded. You can watch it live, or you can watch it as a recording. So would love to, Emma, if you would put, you've probably already done it. Yep, you put the membership link in there already. And just a quick reminder before we go on, please, again, use that Q&A box for questions, because the chat really scrolls by quickly and we might miss your question. So go ahead and put that in the Q&A box. And if you need to or would like to use closed captions today, you can click on the CC or the live captions button, or go into your settings. Sometimes that's important when you're on a mobile device. So if you have any trouble with that, put your question either in the Q&A or the chat, and we can give you some help. All right, well, I am going to turn it over to you, Emma Parker, and I'm going to turn my video, and I'll be back.
All right,
Thanks,
great.
everyone.
Yeah, thanks so much, Amy. As Amy mentioned, our main mission at the Quilt Alliance is not so much about how to make quilts or talking about characteristics of historic quilts. It's really recording and preserving the stories behind quilts straight from the horse's mouth, the quilt maker's mouth, or the quilt lover's mouth. So we talk a lot about quilt documentation. And I just want to talk, before we get started, we're going to talk about how to document 3 different kinds of quilts. But first, what does it even mean to document that quilt? So at the Quilt Alliance, we believe that 2 things that really drive our mission, and I think these also drive the importance of documentation. And those 2 things are that quilts are historical and cultural documents that contain important information about the life and times of the maker, their family, and their world. So all of that is found within one quilt. Quilts are, not a written document, but a historical document nonetheless. And the second thing is that most quilts will outlive their makers. So documentation is really the only way for the maker to speak to the future about that quilt. So documentation is any piece of information that lets us know more about the quilt than what we can immediately see. So sometimes this includes who made it, where they made it, when they made it, how they made it. All of that information is a part of quilt documentation. We talk a lot sometimes about how this is important for quilt historians or museums that might take your quilt, but we know not every quilt ends up in a museum, and that's okay. Many quilts are used by descendants of the quilt makers. Many quilts are just purchased at a thrift store. They're beloved by someone. And it's important to document so that we can answer some of these questions about a quilt. There are so many anonymous quilts floating around right now, and I think all of us probably are just adding to that number every day. And so our mission is no more anonymous quilts. So documentation can include any number of things. I think we mostly think about documentation, quilt documentation, as the label, which is definitely the most important piece of quilt documentation, I think, because it's the most likely to stay with the quilt for its full lifespan. But it can also include a lot of other things, even something as basic as just talking to your friends and family about your quilts, sharing about them online, writing about them, journaling about them, everything else. So today we're going to talk about documenting 3 different kind of categories of quilt: a quilt you've made, a quilt that you were given or inherited but didn't make, but know a little bit about, and a mystery quilt that maybe you don't know, if you feel like you don't know anything about. So I'm going to start out first by talking about a quilt that you've made, or really a quilt that you're making. This is probably the most familiar to anyone who's here who is a quilt maker. You're already doing this for sure. So this is really about how do you document a quilt that you have made, or a quilt that's in progress. So I happen to be making a quilt right now. I'm getting back into it after a long time out of the quilt making game. And so I made a little video talking about what I'm doing to document that quilt, starting even before I began to make the quilt. So I'm gonna go ahead and play that now. Today I'm going to talk about documenting.
Emma, we stopped hearing your audio. It played for just a second and then cut off.
Oops. I started by pulling out. Sorry, 1 second. Let's see. Today I'm going to talk about documenting a quilt that you made. This is the situation in which you obviously know the most about the quilt, since you're making it and you know everything that's gone into it. All the inspiration, the decisions, the reasons you made it, when and how you worked on it, and how you made the quilt. I happen to be working on a quilt right now, so I'm going to take you through a few ideas for quilt documentation using this quilt as an example. But all of these ideas could apply to any quilt you're working on. The process of documenting a quilt can begin way before you ever even start making the quilt. I started by pulling out my documentation plan, which is a document that you can download from the Quilt Alliance website. Here's a picture of my documentation plan, which I put together a few months ago. I'm pretty busy right now and I have 2 jobs and I'm not sewing a lot, so I decided to make a commitment to myself that is pretty manageable. You could definitely check all these boxes off if you want, or you can just start slow. I think it's a good idea to revisit your documentation plan from time to time as well. So I thought about what I could reasonably do and made that a commitment. You'll see here that I plan to label all my quilts and take a few pictures of the front and back, and to keep them in my handy dandy quilt journal and also share them online. Putting a label on my quilt is definitely the top way I plan on adding documentation to my quilts, since it's the best and only way to really keep that information together with the quilt itself. This quilt is very much in progress. Here's a picture of the progress, but I decided that I'd go ahead and make the label before I even finish the quilt top. Before I made the label, I made an entry in my quilt journal. I usually use this page from the Quilt Alliance documentation guide just because I feel like it helps me think through what I want to write down, but you could just use any blank piece of paper and jot down some notes. You can see that I've attached a few swatches of fabric to the journal entry, and I also made a note about which color yellow-orange I used because I've been looking for something that gets close to that color for a long time and I knew I would forget. It's Moda School Bus, if anyone is wondering. You definitely don't have to be this formulaic about it, and you could also keep track of a lot of other details, logging when you work on it, the fabrics you used, what pattern it is, or even tracking your mood and how you feel about the quilt as you're making it. For instance, I was pretty gung-ho about this quilt until I realized that the pink fabric just wasn't going to work and I was going to have to do a lot of seam ripping. I plan on persevering and finishing it though, so I wanted to make a note that I'd had to stop and redo a part since that's part of this quilt story now. I'll probably keep some of these progress photos together in a folder on my computer or print them out for my quilt journal. I'd love for my family, or whoever gets this quilt, to be able to go back and see what it looked like and what I looked like and what my studio looked like, a big mess, while I was making it. This particular quilt I'm making is inspired by a quilt I saw at the North Carolina Museum of Art recently at a show of historic quilts, mostly from North Carolina. For some reason, I just loved the colors of this quilt, but I wanted to make my own version. The original maker of the quilt, in around 1840, also lived in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, about 10 miles from where I live now, and she lived on the same street where my dad lived in college. So including information about that quilt on the label was really important to me, rather than just explaining that it was a quilt that I made. I decided to go ahead and make the label before I even finished the quilt top. That way, it's ready to go, and I can piece the label directly into the backing without having to worry about attaching it to anything. It's also a lot more secure and sturdy, and I can just quilt right through it. I wanted to include a QR code to read more about the original quilt that inspired me, and also a photo of that quilt, so I decided to make a printed label at home. I just did this on canva.com, a free website that offers some basic graphic design tools and is really easy to use. Then you can download your file from Canva and either upload it to a fabric printing company like Spoonflower or print it at home. I just wanted to print it at home today. I started by just creating a new Canva document in the size that I wanted my final label to be, which was about 6 by 4 inches. I wanted something big enough because I knew I was going to add kind of a lot of text, as well as an image of the quilt and a QR code and maybe some other information like a few other links. So I added the title of the quilt, which was Carpenter Star Quilt, and I picked a font that I thought was kind of fancy and old-fashioned from Canva's long list of fonts. I also added my name and the date and the location where I made the quilt. I left the date just as 2024, not super specific. I thought about doing summer and fall of 2024, but I thought I would give myself till the end of the year to actually get this quilt finished. I then remembered that I wanted to put a picture of the quilt, the original inspiration quilt, on the label. So I just copied it from a web page and pasted it right on the label and arranged it where I wanted it. So that was just an easy copy and paste command. And I added a text box with a little bit more about the quilt and why I chose it. This was really important to me because I had felt kind of moved by seeing this quilt that was made in a similar place to North Carolinians, both making quilts many, many years apart. So I made a note of that and a little bit about the fabrics that I used and that I quilted it myself. And I did say fall 2024 on here, so I guess I've committed myself. I also decided I wanted to include a QR code that linked to this page about the quilt in the online catalog for the museum where it lives. So I copied and pasted the URL and then went to a free QR code generator. This is a website I typically use just because it's free and I know it works. You just paste in your web address and hit download. And you'll see there's a little progress bar at the top that's blue. It takes just a few minutes and you don't have to click anything. You just have to wait for the save menu to pop up and save it to your computer. I went back to my label, uploaded the QR code, and arranged it where I wanted it. And as long as the QR code is bigger than about 1/2 inch square, it should be plenty big for any phone or other device to read and go straight to that URL. I'm pretty confident that as long as the URL for the museum catalog doesn't change, this QR code will work. But it's always a risk, of course. I could have also put in the URL or a little bit of information about where to go to read about the quilt directly on the label, but a QR code seemed easier. So I added a little bit more text to explain what the QR code was linking to, and Canva makes it really easy to arrange things just exactly how you want them, where you want them, make things bigger or smaller. You could use any software like Microsoft Word or something else, but this is a nice free option. I also decided that I didn't really love the fonts I had chosen and that I wanted to go for a little more modern look, since my quilt is just one big block and it's going to be pretty modern and not so old-fashioned. So it made it really easy to just swap out all the fonts for different fonts. And then I saved both versions to my computer. So I'll show you how to do that in just a second. There's a share menu in the upper right-hand corner. You just click share and then download, and that saves your files to your computer. I just named it something that I could find later. And then I opened that up on my computer and hit print. The one thing that I did change was I changed my printer settings to best quality. You might find that as photo quality on your printer, but that's how I got it all set up. I wanted it to add just a little more ink to make a deep, rich color. I loaded up my home printer with this printable fabric, but you can use any brand that you can get at any local sewing store or online. I printed 2 copies on one sheet just in case I messed up one. And I'll probably cut it out with a pretty big margin of blank fabric all around and piece it right into the back of my quilt. Finally, once I'm done with my quilt, or maybe once I'm done with the quilt top, I plan on making a 3-minute video talking about my quilt, a Go Tell It video. I decided I might give this quilt away to a 6-year-old friend of mine who's been asking for a quilt and lives in Chapel Hill, near where the quilt was originally made. I'd love for her to be able to go back in a couple of years and watch me talk about making it and where the inspiration came from. I'll probably just put my phone on a self-timer and record that video, probably with the quilt hanging behind me with some tape on the wall. Honestly, it's nothing complicated. If I do make a video, I'll add a note to the label with a permanent fabric pen. It won't match the rest of the label, but I don't mind. I may also add a small patch as an applique with a second QR code that leads to the video on YouTube. I don't feel bad knowing that the quilt might get more labels as it lives on. Even the original quilt that I based this quilt on got information added to it after the fact. It's a little hard to see, but the center block of this quilt has a note on it that says, Mary P. Judd gave it to Julia, 1943. Eleanor Atwater, 1800, great-grandmother made it. Julia's great-great-grandmother, Eleanor Atwood. So that's my plan for documenting this quilt. It starts even before I cut my first squares, and it'll continue even after the quilt is done. But I'm not too worried about doing it just right or having it perfect. I'm just glad it'll have a label and it will be documented. So obviously that's just one of the many ways that you can label and document your own quilts. I think it's really helpful to think through your documentation goals before you start. In this case, I knew that I wanted to reference my inspiration quilt and have a picture of it on there, so that informed some of the choices that I made when I was thinking about how I'd document it. And I also just wanted the recipient to know a little bit about me and how I made it, so that made me think about doing a video. Because I think there's something really nice about seeing the person who made the quilt and the quilt in the same frame. For other quilts, your goals might be totally different. You might want to remember how long it took you or what was going on in your life. You might want to remember which batting you used or which pattern you used. So I think thinking through what your goal is and how you can carry that out is really important. So there are so many different ways to label, and we won't go into all of them now. We have some resources on our website specifically about labeling. I went pretty high tech for this quilt, but I probably will do something totally different next time. I might just write my name directly on the quilt with a pen. It can be that simple. It doesn't have to have all the bells and whistles, but thinking about what I wanted to do for this quilt in particular, I decided to go in that direction. So even before I started the quilt, I started thinking about how I was going to document it and then kind of kept up with it as I was making it so that it wasn't a big pain right at the end, like, oh, now I have to make a label, but I'm already done. I'm sick of looking at this quilt. I'll have the label ready to go. So next, we're going to have a different kind of documentation, which is, what if you have quilts in your house that you own, but you didn't make? This might be a case where you know a little bit about the quilt, but not everything, or what you know might be a little shaky, but it might surprise you about how much you know. So in that case, you can document everything you know about that quilt, but also your own relationship to it. We asked our Quilt Alliance board members to share with us a family quilt that they have and either have added a label to or just haven't gotten around to it yet. So I'm going to share first a video from a Quilt Alliance board member and quilter Lisa Ellis talking about a cathedral windows quilt made by her grandmother. I interviewed her about that quilt, and as she talks about it, we will build a label to the side in her video. So you'll hear a little ding every time that there's something that we can add to a label. So we're going to go from blank label to finished label over the course of 5 minutes. And if you love, just a little side note, if you love cathedral windows, look out for an exhibit of Lisa's quilts at the International Quilt Festival. I believe it's this fall. So visit her website. I'll put a link in the chat for more information. You'll see one of her quilts as well as her inspiration quilt in this video. So the quilt currently is unlabeled, is that right?
That's right.
Okay. And I understand you are interested in adding a label to it.
I would love to add a label to it. I'd love for the Quilt Alliance to tell me what I should put on it.
Awesome. Okay, so if you were going to put a label on that quilt, what would you want the label to look like? How big would you want it to be? How would you make the label for it? Would you want it to be printed or handwritten?
I probably would handwrite it, but if from a documentation point of view, if there's methodology that I should follow, I'm totally open. When I document my own quilts that I make, I usually handwrite them with permanent pen. But I'm really open. I mean, I have an inkjet printer, so I could do something more.
Yeah,
that's the right thing to do.
Well, the great thing about documentation is there's kind of no wrong way to do it, except to not do it. So either a printed label or a handwritten label works great. So we'll just presume that you're going to handwrite this label.
Okay.
So tell me everything you know about this quilt.
So in maybe the late 1980s, early 1990s, I can't remember exactly when, my grandmother presented 4 of these cathedral window quilts. They're queen size with a pillow topper, which is this really cool idea that it's like a narrow piece that lays over the pillows rather than doing the fold in a bedspread. Very cool. Yes. So she made 4 of them for me, my mother's sister-in-law, my aunt, and then my sister-in-law, my brother's wife. And I was, mom with young kids, and this was not on my radar at all. And I didn't want mine to come to my home because I felt like I couldn't take care of it. And so I asked my mom to store it for me. And then completely forgot about it. Oh, wow. That was like this, like I have this memory of knowing that she made these 4 quilts. I don't think this is too precious. Don't bring it to my house in my chaos. So my mom said, no problem. She would store it. Well, then in the, 2011 timeframe, my parents were downsizing. They were moving from their home to a retirement community. And my mom said, oh, I've got these cathedral window quilts that your grandmother made. It's time for you to take yours. And in fact, you should also take mine, because she didn't have room for it and didn't want to take it. And now I'm a quilter. Like, this just blew my mind. It's like, how did I not know that this cathedral window quilt was like in my life? I completely forgot about it. And as an aside, I've started making cathedral window quilts as a result of unearthing this quilt that my grandmother made.
Wow. So this quilt kind of inspired those quilts.
Yes. When my mother gave me mine, and hers actually, I looked at this and thought, oh my gosh, I love this block. I love the texture. I love the overlapping circles. So I'm super excited about now getting this quilt. And sadly, my grandmother passed away in 2007, and I never got to connect with her over this love of quilting. She never knew that I started quilting, and that, has become a really big part of my life. So that's a sad thing. But the quilt is that much more special to me
because I've become a quilter, it's not just, oh, this is, this textile that's been in the family. It's really now so special that I have this quilt that she made. Also, I'll say that since I inherited my mother's also, I reached out to Carolyn Ducey at the International Quilt Museum and asked if she would be interested in having one in the collection, and they said yes.
Wow.
So my mother's is at the International Quilt Museum in Lincoln, Nebraska, and I have mine.
Cool.
Yes.
Well, thank
Yes,
you
that was
for,
very
telling me about it. Do you remember about do you know what year she made the quilt?
See, I don't, but, just sort of trying to do a little bit of detective work. The fabrics that she used, those very bright windows, they look to me as a not expert at all on fabric, knowing nothing about history of fabric. But back in the 60s and 70s, there was a fabric that I was making some clothes. And that acrylic, I think we call them acrylics. They're really super bright. There's some of that fabric in there. And so it looks to me like she was collecting fabrics probably from the 60s and 70s. She presented them to the four of us, I want to say in the late 80s, early 90s. So I'm guessing that she was making them in the 80s, but probably those fabrics, she was collecting them in the 60s and 70s. I'm really not sure.
Sure.
So that's another big question mark.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of people are probably in this very same situation where they have family quilts, and you know when you got it, which is that's a definitive, the latest possible date that it could have been made. And roughly that some of those fabrics are probably 60s and 70s, so that kind of gives you a start date. So I think putting a date range on the label is going to be your best bet. Absolutely. So, and tell me what her name was and where she lived.
Emma Soderquist is her name. And they spent their whole life in Michigan, except for the very last few years, they moved to Zephyr Hills in Florida. That's where she was when she passed away. But the quilt would have been made in Michigan.
Okay. Right.
So my mom was raised in Ypsilanti, Michigan, which is in the Detroit metro area, kind of west of Detroit.
Okay. And that's where she would have lived at the time of the making of the quilt.
I think so. Yes. Yeah.
Great. So that's another really important piece of information. Obviously, put on the label is the quilt maker's name. And do you happen to know her maiden name before she was married?
Johansson.
Okay, awesome. That's a great Swedish name.
Yep.
So sometimes people choose to include a maiden name, sometimes they don't.
Okay.
Quilts are really useful genealogy tools, and so we always say the more information, the better. So you might add Emma, Johansson, Soderquist, the whole shebang. And if you know her birth and death dates, you can also include them there, especially for folks with common names. So that might be something to add. She passed away in 2007. Do you know what year she was born?
She was exactly 100 years old, so she was born in 1907.
Great. Okay, we'll add that to the label too. Yeah. So that's a lot of great information already for a quilt that feels like maybe you don't know a whole lot about, but you do know the maker, where it's made, her birth and death dates, and then finally, I think the most important piece of information is she made it for you. So I think we'll add that to the label too. And which form of your name would you include on a label? How would you want to be identified?
I probably would put my full name, which includes my maiden name as my middle name, because she gave it to me after I was married.
Sure.
So I probably would on the label use my married version of my name.
Okay.
That makes sense to me. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I think that's really all the information we need to make a perfect label. I think we could handwrite it. And just there's so many different ways to attach it to the quilt. A lot of people sew through all 3 layers. Some people just sew through the backing. we talked to Teresa Duryea Wong, who you're going to hear from later in this Textile Talk. And she just attaches the four corners and then leaves the label otherwise kind of unattached. So however you want to do it, I think it's going to be a great addition to this quilt label.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, great. Well, thank you. Lisa, I can't wait for you to get a little label on this quilt.
Yes, absolutely. I'm committed. I'm gonna do it.
All right. All right. Thank you. So again, that's just one way to do it. You can see that Lisa was like, oh, I don't know a whole lot about it, but we filled up this label and we could have added even more information about the quilt, the materials, the dimensions, the birth and death date of the maker. So it's just a process, that took 4.5 minutes to just think through what you'd like to put on the label and attach it. And we're also going to hear from Quilt Alliance board member Teresa Duryea Wong sharing a couple of her labeled family quilts and the way that she labels her family heirlooms. Teresa has several great tips in this video. There are two in particular that I thought were genius. One about, watch out for them, about having labels already ready to go, and the other about how she attaches labels to older quilts so that you can still see all or most of the back. I think they're both really genius. So keep your eyes peeled for those two tips.
Hello, everyone. I'm Teresa Duryea Wong, and I am on the board of the Quilt Alliance. And I'm here today in my studio in Houston, Texas, and I'm excited to be a part of today's Textile Talk. So the Quilt Alliance, fabulous organization. One of the biggest things that we are advocates for is labels. Labels are so important. And so I'm going to talk to you today and share some family quilts that are in my collection and talk about the labeling that I've made for them. But why do we care about labels? Why is this so important? I think really two reasons. Number one, quilts are history. Quilts tell us so much about what happened at a particular time, tells us about people and community. And, they're just really historical objects, and it's so important to future generations to know when something was made and where it was made and who made it and maybe why, if we even have that information. But the second big reason is because your grandmother probably did not want to remain anonymous. Mostly women who made these objects throughout time, most of them were probably wanted to be remembered. And never occurred to them to put a label on their work, but trying to remember who these people are and document their lives when we know it is so important, so that the next generations from now, collectors, curators, will know who made these objects and when. So I'm going to show a couple of quilts in my collection that are from my family. The first one I wanted to share with you is this one. Very, very old. It was made around 1890, and I have a lot of provenance on this particular quilt, and it has a label. This quilt was made by my aunt's great-grandmother, and she lived in a German evangelical community in Nebraska, and the quilt was made in 1890. So you would expect an old quilt like this to have a label. And of course, this one does have a label with all the information that I know about it. And because it's so old, it's an object that would definitely be label worthy. But I also have a couple of other quilts that I wanted to talk about that were newer, much newer. These two quilts were made by my great-grandmother. When we have quilts like these made by our grandmothers and great-grandmothers, it's easy to think, well, I remember who made that. Everyone's going to remember who made that because it was grandma's. But, actually, as the days go by and future generations are not going to remember. So really important to document quilts that aren't even that old. So these two were both made by my great-grandmother about 1950 up into the 1960s. We know that they were made late in her life, and she died in 1968. So I've made two labels, and I want to show you different types of labels. But before I do that, I just want to show you how simple a label can be. I keep a lot of these little scraps of white fabric around, and I've serged the edges. You don't even need a serger. You could just do a zigzag, or you could just leave the edges raw. Really, it doesn't matter. And you could just take a Sharpie and write on these and safety pin it to the back of your quilt, or just tie it in the corners, or, you know, put a little bit of thread on it. It can be something so simple, just to get a name, a date if you have it, a location, anything that you know about this quilt. So important. The label is not important. It doesn't have to be fancy, just really important. Sometimes we have pieces of paper that we know about quilts, and one day the paper and the quilts will be separated. So put the label on the quilt. So here are two labels I want to show you. First of all, this is one that I made. I printed this on fabric that you can put into your printer. Very simple. Just put the type in there and printed the whole thing, cut it out, turned the edges under, and stitched it down onto the quilt. So very basic, but all the information is there. Hopefully over time, the ink from the laser printer will hold up, right? So here's another one that I've made. Both of these quilts were made by my great-grandmother, Pearl Bacon Riley. But this one's much more elaborate. I really enjoy making labels like this, and I have a lot of vintage lace that I like to use. And the same thing, I've printed a photo in the printer and used the alphabet type on my sewing machine. And these are just tied down. So I use pearl cotton and I just tie them in the four corners. That way you're really not covering up so much of the back of the quilt, but it's secure, it's not going anywhere. And I think it just makes a really nice memento. So those are the way I make my labels. You can do them any way. Really, the whole point is just to make the label, put it on, and hopefully someday the maker of those quilts will be remembered. Thanks so much.
All right. So for quilt number 3, I'm going to turn it over to Amy.
Thanks, Emma. That was so cool. I love that last label that Teresa showed. It was like a mini quilt that was a label. So very cool. I'm talking about the mystery quilt. So that's our third example. That includes quilts you bought at a thrift store, quilts you bought at an auction, quilts that you just have always had around. You don't even know where they came from or where you acquired them. And quilts that you've acquired that maybe don't have any information. So this quilt behind me, this beautiful quilt, was donated to the Quilt Alliance in 2019. We have a small collection of quilts that we use at shows and as sort of educational pieces. And you can see it here hanging in front of my house. I think it was 2022 for National Quilting Day. It was such a beauty, and it was really windy that day, and I hung it. And there's my cat again, Fraser Dwayne. That's okay, Emma. But this quilt is really stunning. And we had, you can go to the next one. I just wanted to show you some close-ups of this quilt so you could see what we're talking about. So what do we put on this label? Because this was donated to the Quilt Alliance. Well, we did have, if you go to the next one, we did have Connie Brown, who's a quilt historian and a AQS certified appraiser in Asheville, where we're based. We asked her to inspect the quilt and give us some information about the pattern and just anything she could tell us about it. And one of our board members, Mickey Battay, then printed it on some fabrics, and we had a temporary tag. So that's one strategy I also want to share is if you're a perfectionist or you're waiting to do a printout of the information on the quilt, do something temporary at least. So that is attached to the quilt, preferably not a safety pin, but a stitch, as Teresa showed, to keep that information even just as a placeholder. So she told us it's called Seven Sisters Constellation. She noted some physical attributes. It was quilted in blue thread. She said, the special quality of it is these red and white stripes that are pieced in line up across the quilt so perfectly, and it's just perfectly cut and pieced and placed. And it was made around 1960. She thinks she gave us a value of about $200. So next, so one thing I wanted to include was what a professional would say about what to put on that label. So this is Savannah Bennett, who's the collections manager at the Reese Museum at East Tennessee State University. They have a collection of almost, I think it's 130, 150 quilts. It's very impressive for a small museum. And I asked her a question about what to put on the label when we don't know much. Let's hear what she said. What if you get a quilt that's donated to the museum and it fits the priorities for objects that you would like to collect, but there's no history with it, no provenance, nothing? What would you put on the label?
Gotcha. Well, we kind of have to be comfortable with accepting that sometimes our labels don't have all of the information that we'd like to, but we do our very, very best to research and to guesstimate as well as we can. I'm sure you're familiar with different dating processes for quilts. We get the quilts out and we look at the types of fabrics and dyes and threads being used. And we start that research process to see if we can kind of guesstimate maybe a decade it was made in, as well as sometimes the patterns can tell us regionally if it was made in Appalachia or maybe not. But of course, like I said, we try to be comfortable with not knowing, because sometimes it's impossible to know a full story of a quilt, especially if the donor doesn't know. But we really do try to fill in the gaps when we can.
What if the donor says they think XYZ about the quilt? Do you include that? And if so, how do you word it?
We typically do. I favor terms like presumed. Like, it is presumed that this quilt was made in Southern Appalachia or East Tennessee, but we can't confirm that at this time. We try to provide that context if we think we have some clues, but we never want to say anything in certainty unless we really can't verify that information. So yeah, using terms like approximated or presumed or implied but not confirmed. So that way we're kind of sharing the clues that we have, but we're not saying anything with absolute certainty unless we know.
Oh, I'm gonna use that. That's so good, presumed. What's the word you use for a quilt that is, you don't know who made it?
We have been using the term artist once known recently, and that expands outside of just quilts. Like, we have some international artifacts that came from Africa, for example, and we know that they were crafted, we know that they were handmade, but we don't know who the artist is. So we list that on our labels as artist once known to credit that it was made by someone and it is considered, an artistic work. We just can't name who made it.
Great, thanks, Emma. So I just want to reiterate what some of the things that she said, because I thought that was really power packed. So let's reveal some of these, what goes on the label. So very specifically, the pattern name or the description, you can use Barbara Brackman's book, The Encyclopedia of Pieced Patterns, or her Encyclopedia of Applique, I think it is. And also you might use something like the Quilt Index website to look up and try to make it guess about what the pattern name or the block name is, or just describe what's on it. It's a narrative quilt. Color, fabric type, fiber. You can do a little bit of research about what that might be. And again, even if you're not certain, you can use some wording that presumed or not confirmed, but something to indicate that you're not absolutely sure. The size of the quilt is just something that's nice, so you don't have to always remeasure it. Information that you may have gotten from the previous owner, or an appraisal or evaluation like we did, or any ephemera. Maybe the quilt came with the printed pattern. You could write that on the label. Also, Emma, that next one, information about the previous owners, as we mentioned in our label, and where, when, and how you acquired that quilt, your name, location, and information. That's important. That leaves clues for the person who ends up with this quilt. And then the next one, I just want to reiterate some wording suggestions because I think she had some good ones. And I love that she said, we've just gotten comfortable with not knowing. You know, sometimes we just don't know everything about it, but presumed that X, but we can't confirm X at this time. I like that. I think that's really open, approximated, implied, but not confirmed. And artist once known, which is just absolutely beautiful. And I think that it avoids the term anonymous, which is we'd rather not use. You know, artist once known just has dignity to it, and it really references that person as an artist too. So let's go to the next one. I want to show you what we ended up with. And I'm setting the visual bar very low here. I realized that. I used a pen and did this on National Quilting Day. Didn't line it, you know, measure it, keep it straight. It's my own handwriting. But I wanted to show you this because it really, the label does not have to be perfect. It does not have to be a work of art. It can be your own handwriting. And so I've just pinned it on. I turned under the edges. This is just a piece of unbleached muslin and cotton thread. And if you'll go to that next one, Emma, and I used a whip stitch with a micron pen. And can you go back one, Emma? I just want to show what we have on the label. So the name of the pattern, that it was hand pieced and hand quilted. I did put the note about the red and white stripes lining up across the quilt, the approximate date. Location made, we don't know, but I did put that we didn't know. And I used quilter once known, no identifying info on or with the quilt, the size, and then I say what the sort of steps of donation, who donated it to who, when it came to us, where we were at the time. And then I talked a little bit on the label about the 7 Stars pattern designer, Ruby McKim. And it was, you know, that's just a little bit more extra. And then also put that it was National Quilting Day when I labeled it. I also have a different one. I'll hold it up. A giant version of this label. Someone asked in the questions about the size of the label. This is the one we put on the front of the quilt when we are showing it at an exhibit or a show. So you can never make the label too big, in my opinion. So Emma, if you would just keep going there, I want to wrap up. So we do have time for just 1 or 2 questions. Can you keep going there? Yes. Have you got one more? Okay,
Sorry.
I just want to, it's okay. I just want to remind folks about the Quilters Take a Moment event, documenting your quilt story, because we will have more content just like this at that event. And Emma, if you'll put that membership link in the chat again, and then we can go ahead and stop sharing and answer a couple questions before we go. Awesome.
Great.
So Emma, we had a bunch of questions about QR codes. Will you answer that?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a controversial topic, and I would have said don't use them if you had asked me in 2019. 2020 happened and QR codes got a lot more popular. I think they're a lot more stable. The controversy is just, will the QR code work in perpetuity? There's kind of 2 answers to that. The code itself will work forever. It's a standard format. No matter which QR code website or generator you use, will make the exact same little code. And in fact, a lot of internet browsers now have an option where you can just copy and paste in a URL like Google Chrome, if you use that, and turn it into a QR code. So the code itself will work. What you have to worry about is the website that you're linking to. So if you're using, you can also, like, you can pay a QR code company to upload and host your images. So they are the ones responsible for making your image online. In that case, probably not so secure. I would advise against doing that. Instead, I would link to something like a YouTube video, a Google Drive link, or your own website, even though that too is unlikely to be maintained maybe after you're gone. But some URL or internet website that's secure and is going to stick around, rather than using uploading directly to the website that makes the QR codes. So as long as that link continues to work, and if it's something like a YouTube link or a Google Drive link, those may change, but those big companies are going to have ways to resolve those links. But otherwise, yeah, that is definitely a concern. Sometimes I'll also add a note next to the QR code and say where you can go directly to find it, or include the typed out URL, or just say search on YouTube to find this video, in case the QR code ever stops working. Because basically it's converting the letters in the link into a little block. So that's a great question.
Yeah, maybe we need to have a separate workshop too, on just simply how to make QR codes. If you'd be interested in that, let us know in the chat.
Yeah.
I think that oh, someone's asking, can anyone upload a quilt story to the Quilt Alliance website? Yes, you can. Anyone can. And that project is called the video project. It's a 3-minute or less video project. It's called Go Tell It. And there is, I'll put that link in the chat right now before we have to go.
Yeah.
But that's a great way to document a quilt.
Yeah, it really is.
Video.
And one final question that I think we have time for, there was a little bit of chatter about what kind of pen to use, and I have one right here, so I will just say this is Amy showed this too, this is a Pigma Micron pen. It's an archival ink pen. It's about as close as permanent as you can get as far as we know. I would recommend it over a Sharpie. Sharpies are pretty acidic, but will do the job. But definitely you can get your hands on these from any craft store or online. So they last forever. They're great pens. Sponsor
Thank you.
us. If anyone here works for Pigma, please sponsor us.
Yes. Thank you, Emma. Thank you, everyone who's attending today. And thank you to our sponsors. You're going to see a, oh, thanks, Lucy, for putting in the chat. Next week's talk is The View from the Cutting and Stitching Edge with Jamie, Mr. X Stitch Chalmers, and that's presented by SAQA. You can find all the registration information on our website, on SAQA's website, and our partners' website. And we want to thank again our sponsors. So we will segue out to our sponsor video. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.